And to further debate these two candidates, we are joined live in our Midrand studio by Oliver Dixon, who's a socio-political analyst, as well as on the phone line by Desmond Moela, who's the Deputy President of the ANC Youth League. Let's turn first to Mr. Dixon. What are the key takeaways that we should discuss further according to your professional observation regarding both Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa for you?
Interestingly, as time has progressed, there's a change in language in both candidates at rallies, and the change in that language is coming closer towards similarities and differences. So Nkosazana speaks both of radical economic transformation, but that encompasses, for instance, a black bank and quite heavily spoken on land expropriation. Cyril Ramaphosa has come closer to that. But importantly, the appeal in their language has moved away from civil society South Africa, which was a big focus of Cyril Ramaphosa's early days of campaigning, and has moved much closer towards, restoring confidence in the party outside of personalities, which is what Nkosazana just did as well by appealing to branches. So Cyril spoke quite heavily about the people come and go, but what remains is the ANC, the structure, the organization, and without that, there's nothing. And that's exactly the message that Nkosazana delivered. So in terms of language, they've certainly changed their tones a little bit, but it was a gradual change, I think, in both candidates in terms of who they're appealing to. Importantly, the takeaways here and the confusing part for me about these candidates is they speak about all these things that they want to do. Cyril speaks about land expropriation, not quite sure what his policy on that is. Is it with or without compensation? Who will be the chief custodian of that land? Will it be in the hands of the people, or will it be in the hands of the state? Nkosazana similarly spoke about land without giving granular details about it. So much so, a lot of that came through in her interview with Sfiso on Straight Talk 2 weeks ago. So we have these questions about their policy stances, just testing the mechanical strength of each of their policies and their economic directions. What's confusing to me is that they somehow are both under the belief that these things are going to change because people will vote in a certain way at the conference, when there was a policy conference just a few months ago which focused strongly just on policy consideration. This conference in December at Nasrec has a strong consideration not on policy but an elective positioning. Right? So they need to tell us what their roadmap in terms of changing policies, culture, and direction would be, outside of the fact that certain resolutions were made in a policy conference a few months ago.
And in terms of how they implement it.
Yes,
and
certainly.
In terms of implementation, do you feel any of them stood out?
Obviously they're very limited in the scope of what they can speak about. This is not a cabinet meeting. They're speaking to branch members who care more about the vision than they do about projections and spreadsheets, right? So the conversation needs to be a little bit different over there. But I would like to see both of them sit down in a different setting and describe to us with much convenience, how they envision implementation. Nkosazana spoke a lot about certain policies in social welfare that you would like to see take place. For instance, her idea on an unemployment grant for unemployed young people, which is a fantastic conversation to have in South Africa. Whether or not you agree with it, it's an important conversation. She gave little bits of information about implementation there, but not much, right? The downfall of South African politics is that we don't have these debates. We have to wait for a rally somewhere in Mpumalanga, for instance, to hear about these things, but never testing the mechanical veracity about all of what they're suggesting.
Let's turn now to our phone guest, Desmond Moela. He is the Deputy President of the ANC Youth League. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. What is your take on when Ramaphosa spoke about land expropriation, where he said that those who stole the land must have it returned?
Well, I think the Deputy President, it is his view. He has the right to have a view, whatever view. And as the ANC Youth League, irrespective of whatever view that he has or he holds, we still have got our own preference. We are not going to change, and we have declared public and we have resolved as the Youth League that we have got our own choice as the president candidate, which is Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. And we believe that she's the right person for now who will champion the interest of South Africa and champion the interest of the youth of South Africa in making sure that issues of radical economic transformation are being implemented, because She even spoke about issues of policies, that the ANC has got many policies and good policies, and it will be her role to make sure that when she becomes the president of the ANC, it will be her role to make sure that those policies are being implemented, because the ANC has got good policies, as you were saying earlier on. Now, it must be the responsibility of all of us, including our candidate, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to make sure that all those policies are being implemented correctly.
Now, when we to draw parallels between what Cyril Ramaphosa had to say, as well as Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, both candidates have opted for a united ANC should they win or lose. Ramaphosa stated that he must accept the outcome, and Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma said no matter who wins or loses the conference, all should work together for the betterment of the party and the country. Do you think both will stay true to these words after the conference?
We appreciate that. We appreciate that even Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma said that. Even the deputy president of the ANC yesterday, he was also saying that whoever wins the conference must rally behind the vision and the mission of the African National Congress. Because the ANC, we must not forget that the ANC is an organization or it's a movement for our people. It does not belong to individuals. Now, whoever wins, that person must rally behind the elected leadership, because this is not a traditional leadership. You must remember that the ANC is a movement for our people. Everybody has a right to contest. And if you contest and you don't succeed, the constitution and the policies and the principle of the organization is said very clear that whosoever that wins or that loses must rally behind the elected leadership, because that leadership will be and is going to be elected democratically by delegates. So we want to appeal to all candidates that they must prioritize the ANC rather than prioritizing their own personal interests, because at the end of the day, it's about the ANC and it's about the people who voted for the ANC. So we're saying as the ANC, we welcome their statement and we welcome the statement of the Deputy President, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, that should it happen, he loses the conference, he's going to rally behind the elected leadership, which will be Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the end of the day. And Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa said it very clear that he is going to support Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma should she win the conference and become the president of the ANC at the end of the day during or after the conference during December.
Let's turn back to Mr. Dixon in the studio. Regarding Ramaphosa, he's made quite a few headlines recently with the fact that he said the first step to economic transformation is the eradication of corruption, more specifically state capture, where he stated that those who are party to corruption and state capture are to come forward and pay back the money. What is your view on this, and why do you think he brought this up?
So Ramaphosa said two things about corruption in this country. The first, he said that he supports the inquest to a commission of inquiry into state capture. I think to a large, and in his second last parliamentary Q&A, he spoke quite extensively about how President Jacob Zuma is working really hard day and night to make sure that the commission of inquiry will do a proper job. That's to say, define clear terms of reference as to what state capture is, who are participants, and what are the disqualifying factors thereof. And he spoke quite extensively about that, and he's shown immense support behind that. I guess that means he's quite serious about corruption. Whether or not the sincerity thereof is up to each individual's personal interpretation thereof. Importantly, what he said about corruption, specifically by the private sector, is that he thinks that the two things: the state needs to work really hard with special crime units such as, for instance, the Hawks and these intelligence units in terms of investigating and prosecuting corruption-related crime. And he thinks that the policies are there, the structures are there, it just needs to be pushed much harder. I don't know what he means by that, but some clarity would be nice, and I think he's definitely speaking in the right direction thereof. The second thing he said with regards to corruption, and this is said at the annual awards of the Competitions Commission a few weeks ago, he spoke quite strongly about the role of the Competitions Commission, how to empower the Competitions Commission to do more of its investigative work in terms of finding private sector corrupt players guilty and pursuing justice in that space. So I think we know quite well what Cyril Ramaphosa means in terms of corruption. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma seems to speak to us in a sense that says corruption is a real thing, and there are corruption-based policies and the ANC that we will pursue. But importantly, the real problem with our economic transformation is not corruption per se, but more the structure of the economy. Her belief is that a radical change in the structure of the economy will alleviate poverty, will work towards all of these things. So these are two very valid arguments that I think we need to strongly consider and compare against each other when making our votes in December, when making our votes in a few weeks from now.
And then talking more about what Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma had to say, she also made a call for a black bank that can accommodate the black budding entrepreneurs. What are your thoughts on this?
This bank has been long overdue. I think we needed this when President Jacob Zuma appointed Minister Lindiwe Zulu as the Minister of Small Business Enterprise Development. I think the bank should have been conceptualized at the beginning of her term there. The fact that it hasn't is quite disappointing in terms of, and so we have real questions about what did that ministry actually do besides making funding available, besides providing structural support for small businesses. But I think a structural overhaul such as a bank specifically dedicated towards the support of black businesses is quite important. So I think she's speaking in the right direction. Again, a few questions about mechanics as to with regards to the functioning of that bank is important to ask, but I think there are some easy questions, some easy answers to the questions that we have there.
Now, another parallel founder between the two candidates had to say regarding the land, and you spoke briefly about that a little bit earlier. Ramaphosa said those who stole the land must give it back, where Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma said we need land to unlock the economy. What does she mean by this?
So land is very important when it comes to the economy. The fact that to be an economic participant on land that you rent is very difficult. The fact that the agrarian economy in South Africa is a monopoly is still very concerning. It means very few black people are participants thereof. It means very few black people have access to land that allows them to be active participants in the economy. So without land, there is no real economy in the hands of the people. And that's very simple. Black people don't participate in the economy at levels they should be. That's because they have very little access to the resources. Land is a very central part, a very central component of the industrial makeup of this country, right? That's to say that to own the means of production, you need to own land in this country, and that's quite concerning, the fact that black people 24 years into democracy still don't have those liberties. So it's important that land gets returned. But interestingly, Cyril Ramaphosa has been painted as a mining magnate capitalist that has no concern for the well-being of black people, and this is specifically with regards to his involvement in the Marikana massacre with regards to miners being shot down there. Importantly, when he calls for land expropriation, again, the question about compensation is a very important question. Please do answer it, Deputy President, if you're watching. But the question with regards to land expropriation is central to mineral ownership and the resources related to that. And he spoke quite briefly about that without being very explicit that he's referring to mines that own minerals and resources here. So you can only be a mine insofar as you have access to that land. And a lot of these mines are based on stolen land that belong rightfully to the black majority of this country. If that land is returned, it means that the mines that which that land is based on needs to be returned to the people. Importantly, he needs to make that extension in his arguments with regards to land expropriation. Any shortcoming of making that argument means he's not serious about land expropriation.
Turning now to Mr. Desmond Moela, who is the Deputy President of the ANC Youth League. As you have made it quite clear that you are backing Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma in this whole thing, anything that you feel she hasn't addressed that the ANC Youth League feels needs to be answered? Mr. Moela?
Hello?
Sorry, let me repeat that question for you again. That is the Deputy President of the ANC Youth League on the phone line, Mr. Desmond Moela. Anything that you feel Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, as we know that you are clearly backing her, that she hasn't addressed that the ANC Youth League feel still need to be answered?
Yeah, what we think our candidate, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, still need to address is the issue of unemployment for young people in South Africa, because you understand that this country is becoming younger each and every day. The majority of our people are young people, or the youth in particular. So the issue of unemployment is one of the key matters that must be taken into account. Issues of free and compulsory quality education That is another matter that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma needs to take care of, because it's a policy of the ANC also that must have a free and compulsory education, not just free and compulsory, but quality education, because you can have a free compulsory education, but if it's not quality, it's not education. So it's one of the other matters that we feel very strong. It must be addressed. As we approach the registration and so on and so forth, we need to make sure that we sit with the ANC, so that at the end of the day, they address this matter of fees must fall and other matters, other issues related to issues of education, because education is also one of the priorities that must be taken care of by all of us, because education is key. So we are saying these are other issues that must be taken care of. Let me just venture into the issue of land, because what is key, when somebody, let me just simplify it in this term, when you steal something that does not belong to you.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but some great points there. Youth matters regarding education and unemployment that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma still needs to answer. Thank you so much for joining us here on ANN7 Prime this evening. Oliver Dixon, as well as Desmond Moela, who's the Deputy President of the ANC Youth League. Time now for a short break. We'll be back with more news and updates after this.